What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meets Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meets Sperm. I'm your host, Dr. Omatma, and today I have a really special guest for you, Erica Zeal. She's a mom of 3. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and she's also a board-certified personal trainer and Pilates instructor, deep core and pre- and postnatal exercise specialist, whose mission is to help women live a healthier life and heal their body through movement, intuition, breath work, and gut health, inspiring women to regain hope but also experience true life-lasting results. Erica is the creator of the core rehab program, Knocked Up Fitness membership, and host of the Core Connections podcast. I love it. Hi, welcome, Erica. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Matma. I'm so excited to chat with you.
And oh my goodness, the Knocked Up Fitness just brought a smile to my face. So what? Okay, we can go in so many directions, but you have said that you kind of like focus on this area of pre and postnatal exercise. And I love that your program is called Knocked Up Fitness because there is, we were talking a little bit before, and there is somewhat of a myth that you shouldn't exercise if you're trying to conceive. You shouldn't exercise if you're pregnant. And you're here to kind of say otherwise. So let's get
Exactly.
into it. Tell me more.
So there's so much research out there to back up the benefits of exercise in general, right? We know that, but especially during pregnancy and postpartum and, preparing for pregnancy, trying to conceive. I think the biggest thing is, and so many times, this is what I hear on my end is when I have a client who, again, of course, always, getting your doctor's approval to exercise, right?
Mhm.
Prior to, especially if you're doing, IVF, different things like that from the medical side of trying to conceive or during pregnancy, it's always good to have your doctor's approval, number one. But
Mhm.
so many times when we say the word exercise, what is a physician thinking of, right? Like, I think some people think like when you're exercising, it's like, oh, you're running or you're going to the gym and you're like working out really hard. And
Mhm.
that's what people's vision of like exercise is. And to me, I've actually shifted and I don't talk about exercise as much anymore as I do about movement.
Mhm.
I really like to teach women how to move their bodies so that they feel better. So I get into really healing movement is what it is. So yeah, you can do a workout that I teach because I teach workouts. Absolutely. I teach movement. I teach exercises, but I teach it in a way that is so healing and nourishing for your body because there's also the other conversation that comes up of how many women have used exercise to punish themselves. Right. And so
Mm.
that's where I also like to get away from that and like, oh, we're doing our movement practice today. And just when
Mhm.
you say that, doesn't it feel so much more healing and nourishing and like good for your body? But then sometimes the word exercise can have a negative connotation because we're not working out, prior to pregnancy, during pregnancy, even postpartum to lose the weight or like whatever the
Mhm.
kind of social standards might be around exercise. I really want to shift that because, at the end of the day, movement is really so healing. And so when we can start to look at like, what is the purpose? What is our why behind, why are we doing a lunge? Why are we doing squats? Why are we doing these certain things that we're even doing? And most people haven't even paused to think about it other than, well, this is what I've been doing forever, or I got to like keep the weight off or like burn the calories or whatever. And like that conversation does not even come up in my world. It's like, no, we don't have those conversations because I am here to help women feel better. And so many women have so many aches and pains. And so many times the movements, the exercise is actually contributing to them. And so I want to teach women like, hey, no, we can do these movements in a different way. And that's what people will say I do very different, is how I'm cueing them, how I instruct them to move their body and how to breathe and how to be more connected with themselves. And I mean, gosh, during, preparing for pregnancy, during pregnancy and postpartum, like that's so important to be more intuitive with yourself and with your body and really start listening to what your body needs.
What I hear in that is that exercise almost has this like narrow focus, whereas movement really expands our view of what that could look like, from the perspective of like, you could be dancing. That's movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're moving all day long.
Walking.
Right? Yeah. And we're sitting right here. We're sitting. We're doing some form of movement, even just sitting here, standing, carrying the groceries, doing all the things. And that is actually a really big thing that I teach and try to get across to all of my ladies is like, take what you're learning from me in your movements. And like squats, for example, are such a functional move, right? But we sometimes don't think about that. And I know how many women, moms pull their back out because they bent over to pick something up. Well, if we learn how to pick things up better, we learn how to move better, we learn how to stand better with the right connections, as I like to call them, then all of a sudden life gets a lot easier and a lot less painful physically.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see how this is like so freeing and empowering at the same time. I love it. So let's talk a little bit about that pre-pregnancy period. There is a lot of confusion about, should I exercise? How intense can I exercise? I have so many women that come from high intensity interval kind of exercise routines, and those are okay. Like, I'm not totally opposed to it because that their bodies are used to it. But my thought is always like, could we take it down a notch? And it's really hard. A lot of our women are like so type A that they're like, oh my God, you're cutting out the one thing that I like live for, And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on how like there's the whole spectrum, from people that don't exercise at all to the people that are like super into it and that's like they live for this. Curious how you do that during the prenatal or preconception period.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be very individual. Are there some women that are running and doing HIIT training and CrossFit and things like that could continue it while they're trying to conceive? Sure. Now, if you've been trying to conceive for a long time and you're not getting pregnant, right? And it's been quite a journey, then that is when I really start to encourage women like, hey, let's start to reframe how we're doing our workouts and our exercise. I'm not saying like we're going to necessarily cut it out or anything, because there's, again, so much benefit to doing exercise and movement, but we may have to start shifting what we're doing, right? So maybe instead of doing as much high intensity stuff, we're going to bring it down. So maybe instead of doing 3 of those a week, you're going to do 1 of them and you're going to start to replace, right? So you're going to still spend that time that you were working out doing your high intensity training, doing other movements, because I still want you moving. I still want you strengthening your body. I do not want you losing the strength, right? But we have to start thinking about how could this be impacting our stress, right? And that's something where I feel like I've worked with so many women over the years that I've had to tell them like, look, you need to really actually pull back your workout routines because they're too much for your body and they're keeping you in such a stress state that especially for a woman who's trying to get pregnant, has been trying to get pregnant, if you're really doing those high intensity exercises, workouts a lot, it could be just taking your body over the edge and it feels too stressed at the moment. That's like, okay, well, then trying to get pregnant just isn't in the cards right now. Like that could be a simple little thing that could shift things, right? You just never know. You never know. For some women, it might work. For others, it may not. There's so many other things, as we all know, and I know you talk about on your podcast, right? There's so many pieces, but I think the movement one is so important as well. And I know so many women, especially those that are used to working out a lot and really intense, it's like, oh, but I need it, right? Like you just said, it's like they feel like you have to have it. To me, that's like a fake, it's like a fake adrenaline response. We get the adrenaline kick, right? When we're doing that, it's like we think it's a stress reliever because we're doing that high intensity exercise, but it's actually not a real adrenaline rush, because we're not actually dropping our cortisol. We're actually potentially raising our cortisol even more, adding to that whole stress cycle. Yeah. So is that making sense from that aspect?
Absolutely. I think that makes so much sense. And I feel like the women that are kind of quote unquote addicted to it are often using it as a surge of cortisol because they're already like on the lower ends of what that pattern should look like. So
absolutely. Yeah. And I did that. And yeah, I mean, I was at one point like totally addicted to exercise and high intensity. And like it truly can be. And it's something we have to reframe in our brain and recognize like, hey, is this really the best thing for my overall health? Yeah. Right. Because we can take it too far and it can be just an added stressor that's enhancing or increasing the whole stress cascade in the body. Right. Yeah. And I think absolutely. Sometimes we don't, and so again, kind of back to the whole, like, let's try to choose other things. Like I love Pilates, like yoga, walking. I think walking is so underrated. Women feel like, oh, I don't get enough, it's not enough workout for me. But maybe it's what you need right now, go outside, go for a walk, start to change up what you're doing a little bit. So you're still feeling like you're getting that movement, but it's not as intense. And that's something we can revisit and come back to down the road, right? Typically it's, way past postpartum, or maybe, you get pregnant and in the first, couple of months, you're keeping your movement going. And maybe at some point you kind of feel like, okay, I'm feeling better. I could bump it up a little bit. Like that is possible to like kind of have an ebb and flow. And then generally towards the end of pregnancy, we kind of got to pull it back again. And the same thing, early postpartum, we got to heal, and then we can gradually work back into our more intense exercises. But I will tell you time and time again, when I get women to realize that they were actually over exercising, they rarely, sometimes they go back to do high intensity, but they'll do it with a completely different mindset where it's maybe not so much about like, oh, I got to hit all my, do this crazy amount of reps in this amount of time. It kind of takes that extra, like that stress off. So we can still go for a run and do higher intensity exercises at certain points in our life, but we're not relying on that because it's really like I said, it's like a fake. It's like medicating, that stress response. And we think it's helping, and in all reality, it actually can be making it worse. So for those that are like, really, doing the intense exercise. And then on the other side of those that aren't exercising at all, well, there's so much benefit, obviously, to moving your body. So my whole thing is like, just get started. I kind of mentioned some of the things I mentioned for those, on the higher exercise side is like walking, just thinking about, maybe you want to go join a yoga class or a Pilates class or, stuff like I teach online. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. And I think that's the other thing so many women think is that, oh, I have to spend an hour working out every day. And that's actually so not true. A lot of what I teach, most of my workouts are 10 to 15 minutes long. That's it.
Yes.
And women will tell me
about that life.
Yeah. Women will tell me all the time. They're like, they'll ask me like, is that enough? And then I'm like, it is, because here's the other thing too. And this works so well, especially for women who are like, oh, I'm too busy. I don't have enough time to get a full workout in, or, things like that, or they're newbies to exercise, it's like, okay, but if you can do something for 10 to 15 minutes, that's really nourishing for your body. Like you're working your body, yes, but it's in a nourishing way. Then guess what? Like 99% of the time, if not 100, everyone's like, I always feel better after I do that first little workout. And they're like, then I do another right? Or I have women that split them up in their day. And that's the thing is when we're doing our movement practice in a way that is really just healing for our body, like we're strengthening our body and we're doing that, but it's in a way that's loving for our body. And we are really becoming more intuitive with what's going on with our body. How are we breathing? How is our pelvic floor and our core connecting? What are we doing through each of the movements? It really makes you so much more mindful with your movement and the rest of your day, because I'm always about like, hey, what are you doing today? And what are you learning? Okay, well, let's apply that also outside of our movement. And that's where women can really start to get amazing results and really start to feel stronger, improve their posture and all of that, because, well, it's not just about the practice, it's about your life is really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I love that. I I resist a lot of classes like yoga and Pilates, mostly because I'm like, I can't be in a room for like an hour. But I would be more than happy to like do 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there. That just makes it like so much more doable. And it's probably more supportive throughout our day to like break it up into little chunks and do little like resets
Yeah.
if we can.
It is absolutely, because it's amazing. I always like to teach all my clients, and I'm like, hey, like if you find a couple exercises that really make you feel good, and I'm talking about like, we're keeping back pain at bay, or we're getting rid of aches and pains, because so many women so young
Mm-hmm.
are having back pain and knee pain and neck pain,
Yeah.
and part of it's because we're sitting so much, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a big piece of what I teach. And I'm like, hey, you like those squat pulses or those standing cat cows or whatever it might be, like, hey, do more of that in your day. Like get up from your desk and do this exercise. And we're not doing it again, or do this movement, I should say, right? We're not doing it to like burn the calories. We're doing it because it reminds us to stay lengthened in our spine, to stay out of our low back, right? And then before you know it, you're like, oh my gosh, my body actually feels so much better. And I'm actually doing, you're going to feel like you're doing less, but it's this whole idea. I always talk about like less really can be more. And
Yeah.
we're just nourishing our body, but through, and no one, I've never heard anyone talk about movement and like, we're nourishing our body through movement. We always talk about nourishment with food, which I'm obviously all for too.
Mm-hmm.
But if we're either not doing movement or we're overdoing our movement, right? It's a fine balance. It's
Yeah.
the same with everything. Like there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. And so it's
Absolutely.
finding that
I
nice finesse and balance for your
Yeah,
life.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think that nourishment, thinking about movement as nourishment, is a really great reframe because, especially in the fertility period, I think it's so vital that the movement is nourishing and not depleting, right? It's actually
Oh,
like helping to build rather than deplete.
yeah.
And
Depletion is the one thing we want to try to avoid, right?
yeah, yeah, exactly. But so much exercise is focused on like stretch your boundaries and stretch your limit and go past that and do, and it's that high pacedness of it is actually like almost antithesis to what we want during that time period. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pelvic floor because obviously super important for fertility.
Yes.
So what are some ways to potentially strengthen the pelvic floor that can be supportive to fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum?
Okay, so when it comes to our pelvic floor, like it's something that I talk a lot in a lot of movements and I address it from a cueing perspective. So, like, again, if we're doing squats, we're not just working our legs. Oh, heck no. We are thinking about what's going on with our pelvic floor, what's going on with our deeper abdominals, right? We want to be lengthening all the way through our body. And the thing to understand about pelvic floor function is that while our pelvic floor does function a little bit on its own, For optimal function, it really involves our entire body. And this is where I see women that already have pelvic floor dysfunctional issues can stay stuck or hit a wall. They get a little progress, but they may not get the whole way sometimes because now we're not addressing what's going on with the entire body and the entire movement. So when it comes to, some things to be aware of, especially even during pregnancy, but are you really too tight in your pelvic floor? And I will tell you, especially those women listening that are on that edge of like the high intensity exercise, I like to say, I will guarantee your pelvic floor is way too tight. You've probably got way too much restriction in your pelvic floor. And I know there's a huge conversation that goes on about, oh, my pelvic floor is too weak. Well, maybe, but most women I work with that come to me, they're really actually too tight and too restricted. So part of what's happening is we've been doing Kegels for so long, right? And we're just like squeezing part of the pelvic floor, generally the front, but then the back of our pelvic floor, we're maybe not even working well because we've been cheating it by squeezing and overactivating our glutes for so long. And like,
can I say something about the glutes? So
sure.
we do this hands-on massage with the clients that we're working with, and we do like flip people over and work on their glutes.
Yeah, good.
And the reason that that's so important is because the ovarian ligaments actually attach in the glutes. That's how they stay in place. So when those muscles are super tight, and I jokingly am like, yeah, I have a tight ass, and I can feel it because I've done this stuff on myself, and it is so interesting that if our butt is like super tight and those muscles are like holding on so hard, they're actually like pulling the ovaries out of place. So they're like
fascinating.
Creating this torsion on the ovaries. So then you think about like the physical response of like a direct correlation between your movement or exercise or however you think about it and the impact that it has on your physical reproductive organs is really fascinating.
That is really cool. I did not know that. Thank you for teaching me something new. That's amazing.
I'm super passionate about it because that was like, as I was in training for that, I was literally like, I like jumped off the table and I wanted to punch the person that was like touching my glutes. And she was like barely getting in there, and I was like like screaming, and I was ready to punch her. She's like, oh my God, you need this so much.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I think I do. Oh my God. So yeah, I think like just a testament to what you're saying, and that it has a very direct response to the reproductive system.
That's so fascinating. So ladies, stop tucking your butt and squeezing your glutes all day long. So so one of the first things is like, let's actually learn to release and relax. Even if you are someone who doesn't exercise and you're not sure, well, starting to release and relax, like thinking about your breath, like, letting things let go. And then we want to, think of, I like to explain the pelvic floor as like a diamond shape, right? So at the base of our pelvic floor. It runs from our pubic bone to our tailbone, our sits bone, and our sits bone. It's much bigger than most women generally think it is. Right. And it has fascia that wraps around all the muscle and fascia above it that helps to support our organs. Right. And then we have fascia all through our abdominal wall. I like to give this visual of, okay, so we have our organs in our body, and so many times we think of our pelvic floor has to do all the support. Well, that's not really true either. Like, yes, it's supporting, but we also have our organs suspended inside of our body, right? So that's why I use the cue of lifting a lot, like really lengthening all the way through the top of your head, because when you start to do that, you're going to start to wake up all that fascia inside of your body. So now your organs have more support upward, and not just relying on your pelvic floor to hold everything in. So just that visual in itself, I feel like helps women. But then, I love teaching, like one of my favorites that's really simple and easy for women to start doing and practicing and testing and seeing what's going on with their pelvis and pelvic floors doing what's called a pelvic tilt. You basically just lay on your back like you're in like a crunch position, but you're not doing crunches. And so your feet are flat, but your knees are bent. And all we're doing is just gently rocking our pelvis back and forth, right? You can do this standing against the wall too. So if someone of you is like pregnant and you're not comfortable on your back right now, you can do that gentle rocking back and forth against the wall as well. It's a little easier to feel this differentiation of, is it my pelvic floor doing the work or is it my glutes doing the work? So what happens most of the time, and the reason I like to teach this is it will show women how much they're using their glutes instead of their pelvic floor. And I know that sounds kind of counteractive or counterintuitive because you're like, Erica, you just said our pelvic floor is too tight. It's like, because the pelvis has been kind of almost jammed under so long and everything in there, all that tissue is tight. It can be tight and we still don't know how to activate it correctly, if that makes sense, right? So doing those pelvic tilts and just letting our pelvis rock back and forth. But this is where breath is so important. And this is where I always am teaching like, hey, less really can be more. It's not always about the movement. It's about how were we moving, right? That's the more important. And so we have to use our breath and to find and strengthen our pelvic floor correctly so that it's not too tight, but yet it's strong enough. Our breath matters. And usually when women start doing this, unless you've done a lot of pelvic floor work with someone who really knows what they're doing, most women will feel like, gosh, I don't feel anything, Erica, that you're telling me, and my glutes do all the work. And I'm like, okay, but that's where we have to start. And this is another thing. When I talk about like nourishing movement, we have to stop judging our body when it doesn't get it right away. I cannot tell you how many times, and I'm always talking to women, especially when they first, start running programs. I'm like, please understand that when you start, you're not going to feel things the way that I say them. But if we fight our body and try to force us to feel the things, that's actually going to slow down our progress. We actually have to understand like, hey, I'm learning something completely new, completely foreign to my body, even though we think we've been doing it right our whole life, right? And we have to really almost kind of get out of our own way and be like, okay, I'm learning something completely new. I'm going to practice my little pelvic tilts and using my breath to activate gently. Gently is a really key word here when it comes to pelvic floor. Because if we start to try to and squeeze, we got to get out of the squeezy thoughts. And we just have to be gentle with our body. And then guess what? In time, some people, it wakes up much quicker than others. You'll start to feel your pelvic floor in a whole different way than you've likely ever felt it before. Because it's amazing to me how many women will be like, oh my gosh, Erica, I've been doing this for a couple of weeks and I felt something today that I have never felt before, And so this is where we have to really recognize like, okay. And for women who have been doing a lot of weightlifting, a lot of intense training, right? It's actually generally almost the hardest for them because they're so tight. We're so used to go hard or go home. Like if it's not hard, it's not worth doing. If I'm not sweating, it's not worth doing. And that's really not a good attitude to have. And so that's something I'm always, and especially during these years of, trying to get pregnant and being pregnant and postpartum, like we really have got to learn to work with our body. And so when we can do that and we slow down and we start to understand, gosh, well, our pelvic floor should be working at least to a small degree when we're moving, which is a lot of the time, right? So does that help? Does that answer that question? Do you want me to go a little deeper? Because I could talk about pelvic floor for a couple hours, Amama. So
I think I have an idea of like what I heard a lot was soften and kind of feel and allow rather than overpower and control and try to fix it, quote unquote.
Yeah. Because in the beginning of someone who's never moved this way, they'll just want to use their glutes constantly to like tuck their, oh, I got it. Well, I can't move my pelvis without activating my glutes. So that just gives your body feedback that like, well, we have to find this middle space of feeling like you're doing a little bit of nothing in order to get there. And that's okay. Like, I just can't express that enough. This is a big message. I've been sharing so much more. It's just like, we have to learn to work with our body. We just really, really do.
Yeah. I'm curious because you're talking about the pelvic tilt. I'm curious if part of the practice that you suggest is like breathing all the way down into the pelvis.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
because
Yeah. Yes.
I'm often trying to get people to do that anyway,
Yeah.
but I've never suggested doing it laying down. And I'm
Mhm.
curious if the breath, if you moved it all the way down into the pelvis, if it would naturally tilt, because that's
Um,
what,
yeah, as once women figure it out,
yeah,
it will. Yeah. And I
yeah.
know someone will be like, well, but my lungs don't go all the way down to my pelvis. I'm like, no, I know they don't. But when you're breathing downward into your body, you will get a release response. Right. And so it's like we're releasing on that inhale and we're gently activating, gently being the keyword on the exhale. And then when we do that, we start to wake up pelvic floor, lower belly, everything deeper in that, all that fascia I mentioned before, like just starting to visualize like, gosh, we're working everything together. We're not just working our pelvic floor,
Yeah,
and we have to
totally.
get out of that mindset of just working our pelvic floor because that leads to so much restriction.
Right. Yeah, like it's all connected.
It's all connected.
And the fascia in the body is there's only one fascia. It literally connects our entire
Yeah.
body.
Yeah.
So, yes, relaxing one part of it or one area of it really is like a full on whole body experience.
It is absolutely. Yeah.
That's awesome. Is there something that you would suggest that people do during the fertility period that maybe wouldn't do during the pregnancy and postpartum period? Or are things pretty consistent? Like if you start doing this during fertility, you can kind of continue throughout the
Yeah.
rest of that.
Really, the fundamentals of everything I teach, we can continue all the way through. And then, sometimes at the end, nearing the end of pregnancy, right? Like there might be a couple exercises on your back if you don't feel good, but even then, like the pelvic tilts, I always try to encourage my pregnant moms, like keep doing those as long as they feel good for you. And then we take it up into a hip roll where you then roll your hips up. And once your hips are up off the ground, it's much better for blood flow than being flat. So I still like, again, it's always listen to your body, but that's really about the biggest thing. And when we learn to listen to our body, we start to learn to understand how we need to modify things, decrease our range of motion. Sometimes women get pubic symphysis, pain. And so then it's like, okay, well, now we can't do lunges right now because that's just going to exacerbate. So what can we do? And I do find that as women get near the end of pregnancy, as I'm always teaching this on my calls, I'm like, hey, it's okay that you feel like you're doing the same 5 to 10 movements every day. Like that's fine because we have to go back to why are we doing what we're doing, right? When we can start to answer and understand like what's the purpose of the movement to start with, then it really amplifies your practice and everything you're doing. And then really when we're early postpartum, we have to pull back, obviously, because we don't want to exercise, I say quote exercise, right? In those early weeks, because we want to really heal our body. That said, on the flip side, I don't think moms should not be doing any sort of movement practice because we can lose so much strength in those first 6, 8, 10 weeks. So we even developed an early postpartum section to give moms things to do because I get so many really active women, right? That they want to know, okay, what can I do? Because they know they're like, Erica, I know you say I can't go back to the gym yet and I can't go running and all these things, but what can I do? So again, we kind of take it back to some really good fundamentals of breath work. Our breath is so powerful. We really don't give our breath enough credit. And so during this phase, like people can strengthen their core in a whole different way that makes you so much stronger, but we're not doing crunches and we're not doing intense ab work because we're learning how to address everything together, releasing restriction in a really good fascial lengthening way. And then, postpartum, like then we gradually, build back up on our exercise, but we do it in a way that's healing and nourishing and not like, oh, I got to lose the baby weight or I got to get my body back. Because when you go too hard too soon postpartum, I can tell you because I've had many women that they've come back to me later and they're like, Eric, I should have listened to you because now I have pelvic floor dysfunction. Now I have some crazy diastasis or back pain or whatever it is, because even though they felt great initially postpartum, right? Because they've been doing what I had taught them during pregnancy, or even before, then they were like, their brain is like, no, but I have to get back to that high intensity stuff. And if you do it too soon postpartum, because we have relaxin in our body, because we've had so much expansion and changes that have taken place, we are really, really letting our bodies, we just have massive risk for injury. So that's one thing I just want everyone thinking and just aware. It's an awareness thing. Like even today, you're not pregnant yet, but that's okay. Kind of knowing where you can go is so important, because there's so much messaging out there and that postpartum about get your body back. And I'm like, oh, gag me. I can't handle that conversation, because those women are the ones that'll then be like, oh, Eric, I should have listened to you and, actually gone slower with the right techniques to build my body up. Because we have women who they're like, Eric, I listened to you, even though it's hard, right? It's hard because you want to go do the high intensity stuff. But they're like, then as they gradually got back into it, their body was really ready for it, really prepared. And guess what? They're running faster than ever than before babies. That's a crazy testimonial to think that, right? Women can get stronger. And I want that for moms, but it really comes down to, we have to start looking at how we're moving our body differently. And we have to let a lot of that old school teaching, just kind of got to kick it out the door,
Yeah. Of like, oh, you're going to go right back. Please don't.
Yes, don't.
That first 12 weeks postpartum is still, I like the reframe of it being the fourth trimester.
Oh, for sure.
There's still so many changes that are happening in your body hormonally, physiologically, you're breastfeeding. There's just too much.
There is.
Please do not.
And you're much better
You're
off to have a 10-15 minute movement practice you're doing at home that's gentle, really nourishing your body, helping you with your breath, waking up your pelvic floor again. Or even if you had a C-section, I have a lot of women that are like, oh, I ended up with a C-section. I'm like, well, yeah, you're going to follow the same things, fundamentals I teach. You might just be a week or two behind, someone who had a vaginal birth. And I don't know why we societally, women feel like, guys feel this all the time. I don't know if you feel it too. Like women feel like they're in two separate categories. If it's a vaginal birth with a C-section, to me, I'm like, it's really the same thing. We might just be a week or two behind. That's really the biggest difference that I find. And even for women, even if 2 weeks postpartum, you're like, okay, I'm feeling amazing and my body feels awesome and I feel like I could go do something more intense. Just don't. Because even though you feel like it, I was one of those that felt like it. And I know with my first, I overdid it and then I paid for it. And that's the thing, you will pay for it. And because you just, and I've heard stories from amazing pelvic floor therapists that I'm friends with, and they're like, they'll tell me these crazy stories. And I don't say them to scare women. I say it to help women understand that, hey, you can start to get pelvic organ prolapse in those early weeks. You can make it all through pregnancy and not have any problems. You go back into running or your high intensity stuff too soon postpartum, you can cause your organs to start to slide down out of your vagina because everything's so lax. Yes. It's not ready. And I say that to get
pregnancy hormones in your body that are making it more relaxed and spread out and no, not ready to tighten again.
Yes, exactly. But you will get there. I promise you that you will get there, but you have to be patient.
Yeah. Awesome. This has been so lovely. Thank you so much for the nourishing movement reframe. And I am really excited to hear all of your tips. So for those of you listening in, make sure to check out Erica's tips for the rest of the week. Thank you so much for being here, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.